I'm Mahra Al Khouri from Mubadala Investment Company. As a sovereign wealth fund, our mandate is to deliver sustainable financial returns and create opportunities for our future generations. It is those future generations who are key to tackling the most critical challenges of today. Young people are innovators, community leaders, eco-entrepreneurs, and communities, eco-entrepreneurs and leaders of their company and organizations. They're working together to secure a net zero future and a healthy planet in the face of the tremendous challenge posed by climate change. Today, we will hear from three young inventors who will share their inspiring story and visionary ideas on building a sustainable future, the challenges they faced, and the groundbreaking solutions they developed. First, we'll hear from Fatima Al Kaabi, recognized as the youngest Emirati inventor in 2015. Fatma had a passion for creativity and innovation since she was 7 years old. Fatma's many inventions include a smart steering system that prevents texting while driving and a teleporter, a robot that attends school for sick children. Fatma, your innovation have been inspired by a specific story or a situation. Why is that, and how innovation play a role in your project?
Okay, first, Mahra, thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you, Mubadala, for having me today. As you mentioned, a lot of my inventions are inspired by stories or situations that I went through, and I think that shaped who I am as an inventor. Initially, when I started, I created things for fun. Like, I created a photographer robot because I wanted someone to take pictures of me and my friends when I was 10. And then I recreated a cheerleader because I thought it would be fun to create a robot that cheers for the national team. And then I think I had that moment growing up when I realized I can potentially use it to help other people. And that's when my journey as an inventor truly started, that I can actually change the world with the little prototypes that I built at home. So since then, I've been creating inventions that tackle different problems, like the ones you mentioned. And I hope maybe one day we could use them to, change the world in our own ways and help, our country and our community.
Fatma, given that you started this journey at a very young age, what are the challenges that you faced?
So, of course, there are many challenges. My experience is very specific to me being an Emirati woman and really young when I started, when I was 10. I think part of it was that we didn't have that culture of innovation growing up here. Not a lot of people understood what innovation meant, especially for young women in engineering. There weren't a lot of resources to coach younger people into getting into STEM. But alhamdulillah, so much has changed over the years. I think now the UAE, has developed this culture, and now, you speak to the youngest kid in school and you ask them what innovation is and they can talk about it. So I'm very grateful that today we can see young innovators, and I'm always happy to say I'm not the youngest Emirati inventor anymore. We have so many incredible minds that are here, and I'm happy to pass on the title.
In 2015 you were.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fatma. Lalitia is a student at Columbia University studying biomedical engineering and political science. She founded the NEAR project in Feb 2019. The NEAR device is a cost-effective solution to detect bacteria contamination in water for early detection of water-based diseases, which can identify also the specific types of these kinds of contamination. So, Lilidia, how did you find the NEAR project to mitigate water crisis through innovation and policy effort and advocacy?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for hosting me as well. Fatima, your work as a woman in engineering is phenomenal. As a fellow engineer myself, I think having more female representation is crucial. And so in my work through the NARD project, I have done a lot to try and bring science out of the lab and really apply it in the real world. Too often we see these scientific initiatives that basically live and die in the lab. And what I'm really trying to do with my device that's able to use AI to detect microbial contamination in water is bring it out of the lab and apply it. And I'm really happy to say that I'm applying it in my hometown in the United States, as well as in India and in Nepal, to really be able to detect microbial contamination at the source of that contamination starts and prevent it from spreading across entire communities. It's based again on application, it's based on solving problems that are already existing in the world and the ways that we can continue to mitigate them. Policy is also a really great venture that I've also found to really help implement and support these initiatives. So I'm also working with legislatures, especially in the United States, to be able to secure access to water as the fundamental human right that it is.
Lilitia, one more question. What made you specifically focus on water in your journey? Why water?
Yeah, so I'm ethnically Indian. I was born in India and came to the US when I was 6 months old. And whenever we went to India, I saw this glaring water crisis that we had. People didn't have access to clean water. And unfortunately, it's a pretty big problem in the global south and in Asia. Even in metropolitan areas, people lack this access to clean water. And one of the fundamental things that I found is while there are methods to detect contamination while water is in the water plant, there aren't methods to do that once water leaves the plant and enters the distribution system. And that's what my device really tries to do, is it's integrated into the water distribution system so that if you find a source of contamination in one specific location, you're able to solve that contaminant before it spreads through the entire community. And that's really why water is my passion, because I saw that fundamental problem from the start and I really wanted to address it.
Thank you, Lilitia. Yash is pursuing his PhD in climate repair at the University of Cambridge. He is dedicated to empowering the next generation of climate innovations and engineering solutions to the humanity's greatest threat, anthropogenic climate change. So, Yash, what does it mean to do a PhD in climate repair, and what are you looking for specifically?
Well, thank you again, everyone, for coming and for inviting me to this panel. So, unfortunately, as we all know, being at COP, that the effects of climate change are proceeding at a rapid level. And unfortunately, it may not be enough to stop emissions. There are areas in the world that are critically damaged, one specifically being the Arctic. So that is the area that I'm specializing in, on trying to refreeze the Arctic through a technique called marine cloud brightening. So this technique is trying to increase the light scattering ability of clouds above the Arctic to lower local temperatures and hopefully refreeze. But climate repair encompasses a vast amount of projects, including in my lab at the Center of Climate Repair at Cambridge. So we're also looking at different carbon removal strategies, such as iron seeding over the oceans to produce more efficient algae, as well as other things, including ice thickening, to help refreeze existing Arctic ice.
Thank you, Yash. Fatima, do you think inventions can be the solution to the most pressing issue with climate change, and how can we support youth who are tackling climate change currently?
First, I just want to say it's an honor to be with the both of you. You guys sound really cool. In terms of solving problems, I think as youth, we already feel this immense pressure to be the voice of the future and to be the actors and solve all the problems in the world. And I felt this pressure, especially as an inventor, because, my family comes to me with their problems to try to solve with my inventions. So imagine, big world problems that we're trying to tackle with our young minds and our young age. So I think inventions could be solutions to big problems, but it doesn't only take one inventor. I think it takes a whole community to come together to solve these problems. We're talking about, climate change or climate repair. It doesn't take one scientist in a lab to solve the issue. We need, legislation. We need policy. We need funding. We need, support. So it takes more than just one person to solve these problems. So we could be, most genius people here and think about the biggest ideas, but without the right policy, without the right support and environment, I don't think we can solve these problems. So this is a call, I guess, to policymakers to believe in youth and to give them an opportunity to, project their ideas and say what they have, like we have here today in COP in the UAE. And inshallah, we'll be able to solve the problems when we come together.
Yash, do you have something to add to what Fatima just said?
Yeah, so I do want to say that personally, working in the climate repair space, we see that there is an abundance of attention placed to technological solutions to climate change. However, unfortunately, we realize that it doesn't take a technological solution to stop emitting. That is by far the number one thing that we have to do, regardless of any technological advancement that can uptake carbon. We cannot, in any terms, scale our carbon uptake to the levels at which we are emitting. So to answer your specific question, I don't believe that technology alone is the solution. I think that the solution is to reduce and stop emissions.
Lilitia, going back to the Rainier project, what sparked your desire to move simply from creating your invention to actually implementing and solving the issue of water crisis through the policy initiatives that you worked on?
So this ties in almost perfectly to Fatima's answer that it really has to extend beyond just technology. And like Yash mentioned, we need to continue to reduce emissions. We need to continue to develop the systems that stop the problem in the first place before we also move on to mitigation as well. In my case specifically, I decided to start working in policy to help fund the initiatives that we are creating and actually get them into the real world. A lot of the tools of climate change aren't things that are traditionally investable or traditionally profitable either. There are a lot of other mechanisms to make money and to be able to invest in instead. So there's not as much incentive in the private sector, and that's why integrations like COP, I think, are critical for emphasizing how we are able to continue to support things like climate technologies while also continuing to support the economy, making sure items and ventures are profitable. And so that's really why I turned to the public sector instead. What are the ways that we can fund legislation? What are the ways that we can have government support to intrinsically fund these initiatives, to create support for them in the first place? And even tying it back to something as simple as STEM education. I come from a public high school in the United States, which means that we didn't have a ton of funding for things like research or science, and even having funding to introduce children to science from a young age, introducing the concept of innovation to them from a young age can do tremendous things in being able to solve the future crises that are going to arise. There are problems that are going to come up in the next 10, 20, 30 years that we aren't even aware of right now. I think AI is a fantastic example. And as that continues to happen, we need to continue to strengthen the young minds of today, whether it be through policy, through education, advocacy, and the actual creation of the technologies themselves.
Thanks, Lilitia. Fatma, going back again to your great inventions, you've been recognized a number of times for innovations and innovation contributions. Could you share how innovation plays a crucial role in addressing contemporary challenges and shaping a more sustainable and technologically advanced future?
I think when we look at the biggest problems that we're facing today, it's logical to lean towards innovation, to think outside the box and to think of new solutions. And I think that's what makes innovators special, is that we think not just outside the box, but we're thinking of the best ways to tackle these problems where we're considering communities, but we're also considering communities of color. We're considering, everyone in our solutions. And that's something that's very important. When we're approaching these problems, I think it's important to think outside the box, but to also consider everyone that is affected by the issues that we're tackling. I think this is something that I always try to advocate for when I talk about my experience as an inventor, is that it's easy for me to create a solution for my community here, but I need to think about the communities that are affected in other places. So I think innovation could potentially be the solution to our problems, but like we mentioned earlier, like Lilitia and Yash mentioned, we need support. We need more than just a technological solution or a research paper or some sort of solution. We need support from everyone, and hopefully one day these solutions can come from the bright minds of innovators all across the world from different communities.
Thank you, Fatma. Uncertainty will always be present, especially when we look at issues such as climate change. So Yash, how can you embrace uncertainty when you look at climate change?
Well, so that's an interesting question. So specifically in the field of climate repair, we're actually looking at relatively short term. So 10 to 15 years, because that's the scale at which the Arctic may disappear. So and we are predicted to have an Arctic free an Arctic summer that is free of sea ice by 2030 at the earliest, and this has incredibly dangerous consequences. I mean, for context, the Arctic is warming 4 times more than the global average, and the Arctic plays a crucial role in moderating the global climate. It acts as a way to reflect a lot of solar energy back into space. With a loss of that sea ice, it's being absorbed into the ocean, which then further drives a loss of sea ice. So I think there's two points to your question. One is there may not be this long-term application, especially in my field. It's more of what can we do now or in the near future to mitigate the most critical and devastating consequences of rapidly accelerating climate change and climate change effects. For the long term, it's also really crucial that, the three of us are here, as speaking from youth voices and youth perspectives, because one thing that's really powerful by our presence and by you inviting us here is introducing intergenerational collaboration. This is this beautiful way to transition between youth rising up and becoming the next leaders in climate, and for the current leaders in climate to extend that hand forward and drive that collaboration at an early age is crucial for the long-term look into how we address climate change in the future.
It's definitely the small steps that we take today that will help us reach our long-term objectives, hopefully. Lilitia, could you share a specific example of how innovative approaches or technologies played a critical role in your NEART initiative?
Yeah, so the current solutions to detect water contamination really rely on 2 main avenues. So one is there's these testing strips that you dip into water and they tell you like, yes, your water is good or yes, your water is bad. And then the other option is you would take a bottle of water and you would ship it off to a lab. So the first solution is highly inaccurate. The second solution is expensive and takes a lot of time. So in either case, mitigation is never really the main concern. People aren't regularly going to test their water until they find a case of concern. And usually that concern is, illness. So we obviously don't want bad public health to be the case when we're starting to test our water samples. So I really tried to think of a way that was more innovative and would provide constant testing in a low cost and efficient manner. I've done a lot of work in the AI space, so I started to wonder what that connection would be between detecting water contamination and also using some kind of AI-based approach. And that's really where innovation came into play as I started to consider what's the best way to integrate AI into water. So my device uses microscopic images of water samples to basically identify microbial contamination. And instead of just identifying the presence of contamination, we are also able to identify what type of contaminant is present. So when you have, X bacteria wandering around a water system, we know the treatment that we can use to mitigate that. And it's kind of that combination of intersecting 2 fields that don't seem like they'd be intersected. So you think of biological disease, you think of AI, you think of water contamination, but it's that intersectional approach that's really able to be integrated and applied directly into water systems to solve whatever kind of crisis is happening at the microscopic level. And I think that's really the biggest beauty of innovation is when you try and tie in multiple different, disciplines, multiple different fields of study all together to really question how can I bring them together to basically create the best solution. I think definitely in traditional science there's often this thought that there are distinct disciplines and they cannot intersect. And I think as we continue to move forward in research and innovation and invention, we need to consider breaking down those barriers and really moving in between them fluidly to solve solutions. 20 years ago nobody would have thought that nearly every science discipline would use coding. coding, and today that is basically a necessary fact that regardless of what you're doing, probably code will be involved. And I think as we move forward, we're going to see more and more examples of similar kinds of intersectional use.
What was your biggest lesson learned during your journey?
So I think the biggest is that you really have to think about the application from the beginning. So when you're thinking about solving a problem, the problem has to exist. I think as innovators, it's very fun to create and to build and to do things, but if there isn't a problem that you're trying to solve, it most likely won't be used and it most likely won't be implemented. There's a saying where basically it says that don't look for a problem to your solution, look for a solution to a problem. And I think going in that like one directional approach is really the only way to approach any kind of crisis that you're trying to solve. And there were definitely other moments in my innovation journey where yes, it was fun to build and yes, I learned a lot out of it, but the actual device or tool or research wasn't particularly helpful. So really considering the problem, the scale, and understanding who it's going to impact and whether or not they'll use it. I spoke earlier about how my interest in solving the water crisis in India was a really big reason why I got involved in the water space. Well, having a highly expensive solution wouldn't be effective in a lot of those communities. So that's why having a low-cost tool that doesn't require a lot of personnel and is basically able to run independently and autonomously was really critical for the problem that I was trying to solve.
Thanks, Lalitya. So before we wrap up the discussion, Fatma, Lalitya, and Yash, maybe we can start with you, Fatma. What role do you think young inventors should play in driving positive change, specifically in the context of UAE commitment to fostering a culture of innovation and creativity?
I think the UAE has been doing so much in terms of integrating youth in all of our systems today. I mean, our biggest example is a big company like Mubadala having a youth council and many, other initiatives in the UAE. I think the next step, logically, was to include the youth of the world, which we've seen today in COP, and we're very happy to have you here. So I think the next steps would be definitely creating tangible solutions out of the suggestions of our youth today. We don't want COP to be an event that just passes by. We want to hear the solutions that are going to come out. We want to see initiatives, and we want to credit the youth that come up with them. And then hopefully we can continue with our UAE's vision of including youth in our, in our future plans. And then inshallah, like I mentioned, I think youth would play a very, very big role in creating these solutions because we're the ones who would have to live through the crises that are coming and through the solutions we come up with. So I think we play a very big role. And it's important to include our, intersectional perspectives that we bring to the table as, Emirati Muslim youth, as, youth from different parts of the world. We know what the struggles are like in our communities, and we want to bring them to the table. So I'd be excited to hear about the solutions that come out today and hopefully in the future.
Thank you, Fatma. Lalitya, anything to add, Fatma?
Yeah, I can't speak for the UAE specifically as a non-resident of the UAE, but I think education is really critical from a young age. And what we've seen, especially in the United States, is a lack of innovative thinking from the start. So students, when they're taught to think about science, it's very strict, right? And it's not until they hit maybe like research or high school or college even that they really start to think, science is beyond just what you learn in textbooks, and sometimes there are situations where the textbooks are incorrect. And kind of fostering creative innovation thinking from the start, letting kids solve problems, giving them a final task to accomplish and just saying however you get there is your choice, just get to the end. That kind of thinking from the start trains students to think innovatively, to think creatively. So then when they are asked to solve a problem that we don't have an answer to, they know that creative thinking path, that creative process that they're able to utilize in the future. In research, in the real world, you will not succeed on the first try. You're gonna have to keep on going back to the drawing board, and the actual answer isn't gonna be created. It's going to be us who's going to have to find that, and fostering that from a young age is very important.
How about you, Yash?
This is actually a question that's very dear to my heart. So I have done engineering my entire life. That is my bread and butter. That is who I am. And leveraging my passion for engineering towards good is my jam. But I got into it because of outreach events. I grew up just in Cambridge, Mass, not the UK, where there's a lot of world-leading educational institutes. And what they did was they would run outreach events for local youth. Specifically on Lalitya's point, it was through project-based outreach. So these were project-based curriculum that taught us in context of a real-world problem, and that contextual learning is magical. It's an absolutely incredible thing to do when you're a kid, because you actually understand the application in parallel as you're learning the subject in a rigorous textbook. So that's really important. And another point in the context of climate change is climate literacy. We are growing up, all of us, especially Gen Z and the next generation, are growing up in a very interconnected world with social media. And there are these terms, climate anxiety, and the unsureness that we all face when it comes to climate change. So another thing that we can do is work on building climate literacy, so that even if you're not necessarily in the climate space, because everyone has their own lives, it will affect all of us. So it's important that every person is literate about what climate change is, what are their effects, and how we as individuals and how we as citizens of countries can push towards a better world. And so those are the two things that I'd like to add is getting at a young age with contextual learning and increasing climate literacy.
Couldn't agree more. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard great inventions by our young inventors today, from the creation of the smart steering system, the teleporter, the NERD initiative, and finding solutions on how to refreeze the Arctic. There is no doubt that innovation plays a critical role in to sustainable tomorrow.
Each of you have amazing stories. Yash, how did you get to the climate repair aspect of your journey? I want to know how you started. You're fairly young, and you're in Cambridge University, so I'd love to hear how that journey started.
Well, thank you so much for the question. I really appreciate this kind of conversational dialogue. It's really nice in this formal environment. So as I said, engineering is my bread and butter. I got into it because of outreach. Actually, it's funny. It literally started with a spark. I was 10 years old. I was left in a lab with an LED and a 9-volt battery, and the instructor said, "Wait, hold on a second. I'll come back. I'll get a resistor." I don't know what that is. So they left me alone. So obviously I'm 10. And what am I going to do? I'm going to touch the leads together, and the LED burst. It was a blue light. I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." Tried it again. Didn't work. And there was like a little burning smell. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I burnt out the LED. And it didn't work, and I was panicking, I was so scared, and I was like, oh my God, I just broke this like $500 piece of kit. But it was, I don't know, it's like, what, you can get like 1,000 for $1. But that was that's my initial start. That's where I kind of fell in love with engineering, was through building projects. So I started a lot at the Edgerton Center at MIT, where they invented high-speed imaging. So if you've seen the bullet through the apple, so these very famous images that came out 80 years ago. But that's where it started, and that transition to actually teaching workshops and doing international outreach, and that was, I'm sure all of our panelists agree that actually working with kids and like it's really nice because one point is the best way to learn is to teach. So if you're able to teach it, it shows you have a fundamental understanding of a topic, but the second thing is it feels like this very fulfilling thing, so that cemented my passion for engineering. But I wanted to progress past just like fun like trinkets. Don't get me. I love trinkets. I still, if you ask me about spinning tops, I'll talk your ear off. but I wanted to leverage my passion, as I mentioned before, towards doing a real good. So I started off by looking at a problem, like Lilicia mentioned. So my dad grew up in a village in India, and he told me about when growing up and doing homework, they had to use a kerosene lamp, because all day they would be at school, and then you would be on the farm, and then at night, that's all they had, and there was no other light source other than a kerosene lamp, and this exposure to these fumes led to a lifelong asthma, and so this was a problem that I sought to solve. So I worked on cleaner alternatives, so solar panels, and then I actually did geothermal stuff. So I was able to use the temperature gradient in the desert, specifically in the Thar Desert in northern India, to charge a battery and light up a little LED lamp that you were able to use at night. And then this progressed through like a lifelong, lifelong, through a long time of me enjoying, looking at climate problems. So I worked on hydrogen production for shipping, and I worked on a bunch of different projects. But then I realized, and this is the really good analogy. So we can think of the world as a plate of spaghetti, and we've added too much salt. By creating these cleaner solutions, we're adding just slightly less salt, but it's too salty. Just adding a little bit less salt isn't what's happening. We actually need to remove the salt. We need to do something about that, and that's why I wanted to look into climate repair. And so that's the lab that I'm working at now, and I'm really enjoying it. It's a dynamic group of researchers they're actually here in the higher ed pavilion. But it's a really pressing issue that all of us are looking at, and it's important that we're able to collaborate in this space.
No, really, thank you for that. And Madha, I don't mean to steal your role here, but just out of interest, and I'm looking at the time, we have a bit of time, so thought it might be great to milk as much as possible these great minds. Just a final question, each of you, how can we as youth leaders get youth inventors and thinkers to come together to address not just intergenerational issues, but intercontinental issues?
I think it's very easy as a youth innovator or a youth leader to feel like the tokenized person. So like you're in the room for the sake of there being a young person in the room. And like as a young woman of color, I think it's like you're in there to be like the token person of color because like that just checks off a box. But none of your ideas or your opinions are actually going to be listened to or considered. And there's already like great programs at COP, like the Youth Negotiators program and many, many other ways that they're already trying to create those spaces, but I think continuing to create that space and in a longer run, beyond just conferences or like fun events like this, how can we continue to create space where young minds want to come together to innovate? And I think there's some other different ways that can be done as well. For example, I'm part of a venture called the Conrad Challenge, which is basically a science-based entrepreneur young innovators challenge. So you have to come together in a team. That's a requirement of the challenge. You are not allowed to do it individually. And what that does is it forces a group of like 2, 3, 4, 5 kids to come together, solve a problem, collaborate, and it forces them to work through the entire process of a business plan from start to finish by using their creative thinking and by learning to compromise, learning to work together, and continuing to foster that kind of conversation from a very young age. And I think creating those kinds of spaces, continuing to incentivize both moderators and like colleagues, but as well as kids, to invest time in this kind of collaborative thinking is really critical. And starting it again from a young age is very important so that when they do grow older, it's not something where they don't understand the power of collaboration. Because even in research, even in whatever company or venture thing that you want to work in the future, you will still rely on a team. You will still have to learn to compromise. And doing that from a young age is able to systematically integrate that for kids' minds to set them up for success.
If I may add to that, I think that was a perfect answer. But the only thing that I would add is how can we foster a culture of young innovators from the beginning? I think we lack representation, and that's something I struggled with when I first started. Is I don't see people that look like me in the curriculums, in the media, in the textbooks that I'm studying. So it's very hard to feel that I could, become someone who is, who has a voice, who has a perspective, who can contribute to the world of science. So I think a panel like this is a very good opportunity for someone in the crowd, even young people, to look and say, I look like her, I can be like her. So I think this is a very important thing to add. So representation and highlighting youth, not just on social media, but like I mentioned, curriculums. We need to see people that look like us in the science books that we're studying. And I think that's very important because I don't know if anyone else agrees, but I'm really tired of seeing the same scientists in the book. I need to see people who I can relate to, especially young people. And I think that would foster more young minds that are passionate about science and technology, even the climate crisis. If you see someone who cares as much as you do outside of social media and outside of, just conferences like this.
I think raising awareness is very important, as you said, Fatima, especially when you start at the very young age, and adding to your point, Lilitia, teaching the young generation on how to collaborate and to work as a team is a great skill, because I think so many people nowadays lack such a skill, and this is something that we need, especially we're looking to foster innovation, technologies, and addressing issues such as climate change. Do you have any more questions from the audience?
Thank you very much for such an insightful discussion from all the young, environmentalists, I would say. So my question is to Lalitia, since you belong to India and I belong to Pakistan, so we understand there is a, burgeoning population explosion in the Asian side, and your work is in the water, and water is life, and the cheaper solutions of water purification is the need of the hour. How would you suggest, or you recommend that such initiatives should be replicated at a larger scale, especially in the continent like Asian continent? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so specifically, I believe in science and I believe in data. So I think when you have, 4 initiatives and you're trying to determine which one to implement on a national level, it's going to be the one that scientifically is the best. And I believe that using data is very, very important. But it goes beyond just determining what is going to make the water the cleanest, for example. What's also going to be the most applicable? If there is something that can get you 100% of contamination removal, but it costs $1 million, it's not going to be systematically applied, especially not in a country like India. Like the village that my grandparents are from, they do not have that kind of funding to invest in something like that. They would be walking miles for water in the first place. So I think that's kind of the first way to look at how are we going to pick a certain solution over other solutions. And I also think that it's not a situation of one solution fits all. So there's not one global device that is going to fit every single sector of the world. There are many different needs of somebody from the US versus somebody in India versus somebody in Africa. And that all comes down to systematically what are the needs of those communities. For example, in the United States, we have a really big problem with elemental contamination. So you have things like lead poisoning. Flint, Michigan is a fantastic example. So microbial contamination in Flint, Michigan is not a problem for them. They are concerned with lead. So implementing my device to detect microbial contamination isn't at their top of list priorities, but they're more focused on things like lead poisoning instead. However, in countries like India, for example, microbial contamination is the biggest reason why people are getting sick from water. water. And that's why we need to address, say, the microbial contamination first, instead of saying, let's put lead detectors in all the water systems in India. So it's really understanding the needs of the community and also just looking at the data, but beyond just accuracy, also looking at things like applicability, cost, efficiency, all those kinds of things to understand what is going to be the best solution. And, trial and error is unfortunately a part of the problem, and it's going to be something where testing it in smaller communities and then expanding it is also going to be pretty important to assess those crises. Thank you.
I think we can take one last question before we end up the discussion.
Hi, thank you for your ideas. So my question is, have you implemented or applied your inventions or ideas? And has there been impact? And if not, what do you need to get the impact for the masses, say, globally?
Yeah, so for me, kind of adding on to my answer to the gentleman's question, I am in the process of implementing it in my hometown back in the US, as well as in India and in Nepal. And so we're in beta testing, essentially, where we're trying to see in 3 different areas, how is my innovation standing up? What are the kind of needs of the innovations? I come from like a suburban city in the United States compared to a village in India, compared to like a more mountainous region in Nepal. So those are like 3 case studies that we're doing right now to see what are the tweaks that need to be made to kind of make it more applicable, but also to see how does it hold up to 3 different standards of use in 3 different situations. So hopefully we're able to expand far beyond that soon, but that's kind of where we're focused on for now.
Thank you. Anything to add?
Sure.
No, you can go.
I was going to say, at least for me, I think something that we're lacking in the UAE is support for inventors after they come up with their ideas. That's something I've struggled with over the years. Since I started at a really young age, I like the awareness of, how do I patent my inventions? How do I protect my ideas? And I've had a lot of my ideas being implemented by other people just because I spoke about them or I didn't really know the exact process to go through. So I think supporting young innovators when it comes to patenting their ideas is very important. And I think the second thing is helping us with the business aspect. I could talk about engineering all day, but I know nothing about business. So when it comes to protecting your ideas and actually commercializing your idea, it's very important that we find that support or build that bridge between innovators and creating your invention and actually starting a startup or creating your own lab or crossing that bridge. So I think it's very important to guide people, and I think that's where I struggle personally, and I'm trying to walk on that bridge. Is I have the models at home, they're created, they work, but I can't really scale them because I don't have the right funding or I have the right knowledge. So I hope one day, inshallah, we can build that bridge and cross it together and commercialize our ideas and help people that are supposed to use our inventions.
I just want to echo to a very important point that you just mentioned. Simplifying the process, especially for our young inventors, is very important for them to take the step ahead and also to motivate and encourage the younger generation to actually look at such innovation. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
One last
I just
point
have one
from
more
you,
point.
Yash.
I'm not implementing. So I'm a researcher, but it's important to consider that there are several different spheres that we're looking at. We're looking at policy, research, activism, and actually bridging between all those spheres is really important. That's why COP is so beautiful, is we have all these different people from different backgrounds in one area that's able to get connected and collaborate towards a common goal. And in getting researchers more connected with policymakers to understand that there is groundbreaking. So, I mean, it's just more of a rhetorical question, but how many of you have thought that people are trying to refreeze the Arctic, for example? Well, exactly, but one, So getting everyone connected is definitely very important.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks.